How does a single moment unravel a marriage? What happens when a husband, dismissed and humiliated for his suspicions, calmly delivers divorce papers after quietly gathering proof? The night I laughed off his concerns as paranoia was the night he took back his power and changed everything. The candles on Nathan's 37th birthday cake flickered in the dining room as I watched my husband push food around his plate, barely touching the prime rib I'd spent hours preparing. His dark eyes kept darting between me and his younger brother Damian, who sat across from us, regaling the table with stories from his latest sales conference. So there I was, stuck in an elevator with the CEO of Morrison Industries for 20 minutes. Damien laughed, his charm filling the room like expensive cologne. By the time we reached the 15th floor, I'd landed a 6-figure contract. I found myself leaning forward, captivated by his confidence. "That's incredible, Damien. You always know exactly what to say." Nathan's fork clinked against his plate. "Some people call that luck." "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Nathan," I said with a laugh, reaching over to squeeze Damien's arm. "Your brother worked hard for that deal." Celia Grieve, Nathan's mother, set down her wine glass with a sharp clink. Her steel-grey hair was pulled back in its usual severe bun, and her pale blue eyes fixed on me with unmistakable disapproval. "Perhaps we should focus on celebrating Nathan tonight." "Of course we are," I replied smoothly, though my hand lingered on Damien's forearm just a moment longer than necessary. "That's why I made his favorite dinner." Nathan's father Roland cleared his throat uncomfortably. "The roast is excellent, Eulalia. You've outdone yourself." 7-year-old Mira looked up from her mashed potatoes, her wide brown eyes, so much like Nathan's, moving between the adults with growing confusion. "Daddy, why aren't you eating your cake?" Nathan's expression softened as he looked at our daughter. "Just not very hungry tonight, sweetheart." "But Mommy made it special for you," Mira insisted, her voice taking on that worried tone that always made my chest tighten with guilt. "Your daddy's just tired from work," I said quickly. "You know how he gets when he's stressed about his engineering projects." Tamsin Doyle, my best friend since college, nodded enthusiastically from her seat next to Roland. "Nathan, you really should learn to relax more. Life's too short to be so serious all the time." Patrick Doyle, Tamsin's husband and Nathan's longtime friend, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Some of us just process things differently, Tamsin." I caught the warning look Patrick shot his wife, but Tamsin either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. She'd been encouraging me to live a little for months now, constantly pointing out how Nathan's quiet, methodical nature was holding me back from enjoying myself. "Exactly," I agreed, raising my wine glass. "We should all learn to embrace spontaneity more often." Damien clinked his glass against mine, his fingers brushing mine as he smiled. "I'll drink to that." Nathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I think I'll get some air." "Nathan, wait." Patrick started to rise, but Nathan was already walking toward the back door. "Let him go," I said with an exaggerated sigh. "He's been like this for weeks. Everything's a crisis with him lately." Celia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Perhaps he has reason to be concerned." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. I felt heat creep up my neck, but I kept my voice light and casual. "Concerned about what? I'm here with family, celebrating his birthday. What could possibly be wrong with that?" "Nothing at all," Roland said quickly, shooting his wife a warning look. "Nathan's just been working long hours on that new bridge project. The stress is getting to him." Damien reached for the wine bottle, refilling my glass without being asked. "Construction deadlines can be brutal. I don't know how you engineers do it." "Nathan's always been too rigid," I said, accepting the wine gratefully. "He sees problems where none exist." Through the kitchen window, I could see Nathan standing on our back deck, his hands gripping the railing as he stared out at the darkening sky. His shoulders were tense, and even from this distance, I could sense his frustration radiating through the glass. Maybe I should go check on Daddy, Mira said quietly, sliding down from her chair. Finish your dinner first, sweetheart, I told her. Daddy just needs some time to think. But as I watched my husband's isolated figure through the window, I felt a flicker of something that might have been guilt. The feeling was quickly overwhelmed by irritation. Why couldn't Nathan just enjoy himself for once? Why did he have to make everything so complicated? Damien's hand found mine under the table, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. The touch sent electricity up my arm, and I found myself smiling despite the tension. You deserve to be happy, Leah, he said quietly, using the nickname only my closest friends knew. Celia's sharp intake of breath told me she'd heard him, but I didn't care. For the first time in months, someone was paying attention to me, making me feel alive and wanted instead of taken for granted. When Nathan finally came back inside 20 minutes later, his birthday cake sat forgotten on the table, the candles burned down to waxy stubs. The party was effectively over, and I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry about it. The downtown bistro buzzed with Friday night energy as our group claimed a large corner table. I'd suggested the venue, knowing the trendy atmosphere would lift my spirits after another week of Nathan's silent treatment at home. He'd barely spoken to me since his birthday dinner 3 days ago, communicating only through terse nods and one-word answers. This place is perfect, Leah, Tamsin gushed, sliding into the seat beside me. Much better than those boring chain restaurants Nathan usually picks. Nathan took the chair across from me without comment, his expression carefully neutral. Patrick sat beside him, and I noticed how the two men exchanged a meaningful look that made my stomach tighten with annoyance. Where's Damien? I asked, checking my phone for the third time in 5 minutes. He said he'd be here by 7. Traffic's probably terrible downtown, Roland offered diplomatically. Celia remained pointedly silent, her attention focused on the menu, as if it contained the secrets of the universe. When Damien finally arrived 15 minutes later, his entrance turned heads throughout the restaurant. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, his dark hair styled just enough to look effortlessly attractive. Several women at nearby tables followed his progress as he made his way to our group. Sorry I'm late, he said, flashing that megawatt smile that never failed to make my pulse quicken. Client meeting ran long. The only empty chair was between me and Tamsin, and I felt a thrill of satisfaction as Damien settled beside me, his cologne mixing with the restaurant's ambient aromas of garlic and wine. No problem at all, I said, immediately pouring him a glass from the bottle of Pinot Grigio I'd ordered. We were just getting started. Nathan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. His silence only fueled my determination to enjoy myself despite his mood. So, Damien, Tamsin said with obvious appreciation, Leah tells me you just closed a huge deal. That must be so exciting. It's been a good quarter, Damien replied modestly, though his eyes sparkled with pride. Sometimes the stars just align, you know? I found myself leaning closer to him, drawn by his confidence and enthusiasm. Damien's being modest. He's the top salesperson in his entire region. That's impressive, Patrick said carefully. What kind of sales do you do again? Medical equipment, Damien explained. Hospitals, clinics, surgical centers. It's competitive, but I love the challenge. Nathan finally spoke up. Must require a lot of travel. Some, Damien acknowledged, but I'm based here in the city, so I'm home most nights. How convenient, Nathan said quietly, and something in his tone made me bristle. What's that supposed to mean? I demanded, my voice sharper than I'd intended. Nothing, Nathan replied, turning his attention back to his untouched appetizer. Just making conversation. The tension at our end of the table was becoming palpable, and I could see Celia watching us with growing concern. Determined not to let Nathan's paranoia ruin another evening, I deliberately turned my body toward Damien, effectively cutting Nathan out of our conversation. Tell me about the conference you mentioned at dinner the other night, I said, resting my chin on my hand and gazing up at Damien with rapt attention. For the next hour, I hung on Damien's every word as he regaled us with stories from his business trips and client meetings. His natural charisma filled the space around us, making me feel more alive than I had in months. When he laughed at my jokes or complimented my dress, I felt beautiful and appreciated in a way that Nathan's quiet presence never achieved. You have such an interesting life, I said, refilling his wine glass for the fourth time. It must be amazing to travel and meet new people all the time. It has its perks, Damien agreed, his hand briefly touching mine as he accepted the glass. Though sometimes I think I'd trade it all for a quiet evening with the right company. The look he gave me made my cheeks flush with warmth, and I was dimly aware of Nathan's sharp intake of breath from across the table. Leah, Nathan said quietly, maybe we should head home soon. Mira has soccer practice early tomorrow. Mira's sleeping at your mother's tonight, I replied without looking at him. Remember? We discussed this yesterday. Actually, Celia interjected, I think Nathan's right. It's getting late and... Oh, come on, I interrupted, waving my hand dismissively. It's Friday night. We're finally having fun for once. The word finally hung in the air like an accusation, and I saw Patrick wince at the implication. Nathan's face had gone completely pale, but his voice remained steady. I think I'll call it tonight, he said, reaching for his wallet. Early morning tomorrow. Don't be such a party pooper, Tamsin chimed in, emboldened by the wine. Leah's right. You work too much, Nathan. You need to learn to live a little. Some of us have responsibilities, Nathan replied quietly, placing several bills on the table, enough to cover his meal and drinks. What's that supposed to mean? I snapped, finally turning to face him. I'm responsible. I work full-time. I take care of Mira. I manage our household. I didn't say you weren't, Nathan said, standing slowly. I just meant that I have an early day tomorrow. But his words felt like criticism, and the wine had loosened my tongue enough to voice the resentment I'd been harboring for weeks. You always have an early day, Nathan, or a late meeting, or a project deadline. When was the last time you actually wanted to spend time with me? When was the last time you made me feel like I mattered? The entire table fell silent, and I was vaguely aware of other diners turning to stare at our increasingly public argument. But I was past caring about appearances. That's not fair, Leah, Patrick said quietly. Nathan works hard to provide for... Oh, please, I cut him off. Don't lecture me about my own marriage, Patrick. You have no idea what it's like living with someone who treats you like a roommate instead of a wife. Damien's hand found my shoulder, his touch gentle and comforting. Hey, let's not let this escalate, he said softly. We're all family here. The irony of Damien being the voice of reason wasn't lost on me, and I felt a surge of gratitude toward him for trying to diffuse the situation Nathan had created. Nathan looked around the table, his gaze lingering on Damien's hand on my shoulder before meeting my eyes one last time. I'll see you at home, he said simply, then walked away without another word. The silence that followed his departure was deafening. Celia and Roland exchanged worried glances, while Patrick stared down at his hands with obvious discomfort. Well, Tamsin said finally, that was awkward. He's just stressed, I said quickly, though my hands were shaking slightly as I reached for my wine glass. Work has been really demanding lately. Still, Roland said gently, perhaps we should call it tonight as well. This has been... intense. As our group began to disperse, I found myself walking to the parking garage with Damien, our footsteps echoing in the concrete structure. The cool night air helped clear my head slightly, but I was still buzzing with anger and wine. I'm sorry about that, I said as we reached my car. Nathan's been impossible lately. You don't need to apologize, Damien replied, his voice warm with understanding. Marriage is complicated. Sometimes people grow apart. His words hit closer to home than I was comfortable admitting. As I fumbled with my car keys, Damien's hand covered mine, steadying them. Are you okay to drive? He asked, his face close enough that I could feel his breath on my cheek. "I'm fine," I whispered, though my heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the wine. "Text me when you get home safe," he said, his thumb brushing across my knuckles before he released my hand. As I drove home through the empty streets, I couldn't shake the memory of his touch or the way he'd looked at me with such genuine concern. Nathan's car was already in the driveway when I arrived, and I could see the glow of his laptop screen through the home office window. Still working, even at 11 o'clock on a Friday night. The sight only reinforced everything I'd said at dinner about feeling neglected and unappreciated. I slipped into the house quietly, but Nathan's office door was open, and I could feel his presence even though he didn't acknowledge my return. For a moment I considered going to him, trying to explain my frustration, and maybe finding a way to bridge the growing gap between us. Instead, I climbed the stairs to our empty bedroom, pulled out my phone, and typed a quick message to Damien. "Made it home safe. Thank you for being so understanding tonight." His response came within minutes. "Always here if you need to talk. Sleep well, Leah." I fell asleep, clutching my phone, feeling more connected to my brother-in-law than I had to my own husband in months. The argument with Nathan started over something trivial. I'd forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning, and he'd mentioned it in that quiet, disappointed way that always made me feel like a scolded child. 3 weeks had passed since the disastrous dinner at the bistro, and the tension in our house had become suffocating. "It's not about the shirts, Leah," Nathan said, his voice carefully controlled, as he stood in our kitchen doorway. "It's about the pattern. You say you'll do something, then you don't follow through." "I had a busy day at work," I snapped, slamming the dishwasher door harder than necessary. "I'm sorry I'm not perfect like you." "I never said I was perfect. I just asked you to pick up my dry cleaning when you said you would." The reasonableness in his tone only made me angrier. How could he stand there being so calm and logical when I felt like I was drowning in the mundane details of our life together? "You know what, Nathan? I'm tired of being your personal assistant. I work 40 hours a week, I take care of Mira, I manage this household, and you act like I'm some kind of failure because I forgot one simple errand." "That's not what I—" "Yes, it is," I interrupted, grabbing my purse and keys from the counter. "You've been looking for reasons to criticize me ever since your birthday dinner. I'm going out." "Where are you going?" Nathan asked, but I was already heading for the door. "Somewhere I'm actually appreciated," I called over my shoulder, knowing the words were designed to hurt him. I sat in my car for several minutes, my hands shaking with anger and something that felt dangerously close to desperation. Without really thinking about it, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Damian's number. We'd been texting sporadically since that night at the bistro. Nothing inappropriate, just friendly check-ins and the occasional shared joke. But somehow, he'd become the person I most wanted to talk to when I felt overwhelmed. "Hey," I typed, "are you free tonight? Having a rough evening and could use a friend?" His response came quickly. "Of course. Want to come over? I'll open a bottle of wine." Damian's apartment was everything our family home wasn't: sleek, modern, and blissfully quiet. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the city skyline, and the minimalist decor spoke of a man who answered to no one but himself. "You look upset," he said as he handed me a glass of Chardonnay, his fingers lingering against mine for just a moment longer than necessary. "Nathan and I had another fight," I admitted, sinking into his leather sofa. "I feel like I can't do anything right anymore." Damien settled beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne and feel the warmth radiating from his body. "What happened?" As I told him about the dry cleaning incident and Nathan's reaction, Damien listened with the kind of focused attention I'd been craving at home. He nodded in all the right places, made sympathetic sounds when I described feeling unappreciated, and never once suggested that maybe I was being unreasonable. "You deserve better than that," he said when I finished. "Marriage should be about support and understanding, not constant criticism." That's what I keep thinking, I said, taking a larger gulp of wine than I probably should have. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells all the time, waiting for the next thing I'll do wrong. You're not doing anything wrong, Leah, Damian said softly, his hand coming to rest on my knee. You're a beautiful, intelligent woman who deserves to be cherished, not criticized. The touch of his hand sent electricity through my entire body, and I found myself leaning closer to him without conscious thought. Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I'd made different choices. It's not too late to make new ones, he murmured, his thumb tracing small circles on my leg through the fabric of my dress. Damien, I whispered, but I didn't pull away. If anything, I moved closer, drawn by the warmth in his dark eyes and the way he was looking at me, like I was the most fascinating woman in the world. I know this is complicated, he said, his voice rough with emotion, but I can't stop thinking about you. The way Nathan treats you, it's not right. You deserve so much more. When he leaned in to kiss me, I didn't resist. His lips were soft and warm, and for the first time in months, I felt truly alive. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but when I responded by threading my fingers through his hair, it deepened into something hungry and desperate. We shouldn't, I breathed against his mouth, even as my body pressed closer to his. Why not? He asked, his hands framing my face with infinite tenderness. Life is short, Leah. Why shouldn't we be happy? It was exactly what I wanted to hear. Permission to take what I needed, to stop feeling guilty for wanting more than the quiet, predictable life Nathan offered. When Damien kissed me again, I let myself sink into the sensation, pushing away all thoughts of consequences and complications. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I reluctantly pulled away to check it. The message was from Mira, and my heart clenched as I read her words. Mommy, where are you? Daddy seems sad and I'm scared. Can you come home? Reality crashed over me like cold water, and I suddenly became aware of where I was and what I was doing. I was in my brother-in-law's apartment, kissing him while my daughter was at home worried about her parents' marriage. I have to go, I said, jumping up from the sofa so quickly that I nearly spilled my wine. Leah, wait, Damien said, reaching for my hand. Don't let guilt ruin this. We both know there's something real between us. This is wrong, I said, but even as I spoke the words, I wasn't entirely convinced. The way Damien made me feel, wanted, desirable, alive, was intoxicating after months of feeling invisible in my own marriage. Is it wrong to want to be happy? He asked gently. Is it wrong to want to be with someone who truly appreciates you? I looked into his eyes and saw everything I'd been missing at home. Passion, attention, desire. The rational part of my brain knew this was a dangerous path, but my heart was starving for the kind of connection Damien offered. I need time to think, I said finally, gathering my purse and keys. Of course, he said, walking me to the door. But Leah, whatever you decide, know that I'm here for you. You don't have to settle for a marriage that makes you miserable. As I drove home through the dark streets, my lips still tingling from his kisses, I tried to reconcile the guilt churning in my stomach with the exhilaration I felt. Nathan had been distant and critical lately, taking me for granted while I struggled to keep our family functioning. Didn't I deserve to feel valued and desired? By the time I pulled into our driveway, I'd almost convinced myself that what happened with Damien was Nathan's fault. If he'd been a better husband, if he'd paid attention to my needs, I never would have sought comfort elsewhere. The house was quiet when I slipped inside, but I could see light under Mira's bedroom door. I knocked softly before entering and found my daughter sitting up in bed, her favorite stuffed elephant clutched tightly in her arms. Mommy, she said, relief evident in her voice. I was worried about you. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I said, sitting on the edge of her bed and smoothing her dark hair. I just needed some air. Everything's fine. Are you and Daddy getting divorced? She asked in a small voice that broke my heart. Of course not, I lied smoothly. Daddy and I just had a little disagreement. All married people do that sometimes. Promise, she asked, her brown eyes so much like Nathan's that I had to look away. I promise, I said, kissing her forehead. Now get some sleep. As I tucked her back under her covers, I pushed away the voice in my head that whispered I was making promises I might not be able to keep. Whatever happened between Nathan and me, I would make sure Mira was protected from the fallout. Nathan was already in bed when I finally made it to our room, his back turned to my side and his breathing deep and even. I slipped under the covers quietly, but as I lay there in the darkness, I couldn't stop thinking about the way Damien had looked at me, the way his touch had made me feel beautiful and wanted. My phone buzzed softly with a text message, and I carefully checked it under the covers. It was from Damien. Thank you for tonight. You're amazing, Leah. Sweet dreams. I stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it, but I couldn't delete the memory of his hands on my face or the promise of something more that lingered in his kiss. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I told myself that I wasn't really doing anything wrong. Not yet, anyway. Sunday lunch at the Grieve family home had always been a tradition, but today, the familiar ritual felt like walking through a minefield. Celia had prepared her usual spread: roast chicken, garlic potatoes, green beans from her garden, but the warm, inviting atmosphere I remembered from early in my marriage was noticeably absent. Nathan sat across from me at the polished oak table, making polite conversation with his father about the bridge project while carefully avoiding my eyes. Mira chattered happily beside me, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension flowing between the adults. More wine, dear? Celia asked, though her tone was decidedly cool as she offered me the bottle. Thank you, I replied, extending my glass with a smile that felt painted on. Lunch is delicious as always. Celia's pale blue eyes studied me with uncomfortable intensity. You look tired, Eulalia. Are you sleeping well? The question felt loaded with meaning, and I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. Just busy with work and keeping up with this one, I said, ruffling Mira's hair affectionately. Mummy's been going out a lot lately, Mira announced innocently, and I felt my stomach drop. She went out Wednesday night and Thursday night too. Did she now? Celia's voice was deceptively mild, but I could feel her disapproval radiating across the table like heat from a furnace. Just running errands, I said quickly, though I could feel Nathan's attention sharpen. You know how it is. Grocery shopping, picking up dry cleaning, that sort of thing. Funny, Nathan said quietly. I thought the dry cleaner was closed by 6 on weekdays. My cheeks flushed hot, and I took a large gulp of wine to buy myself time. I had other errands too. A woman's work is never done, right, Celia? But Nathan's mother wasn't smiling. Instead, she set down her fork with deliberate precision and fixed me with a stare that made me feel like a teenager caught sneaking in past curfew. Eulalia, might I have a word with you in the kitchen? It wasn't really a question. I followed her into the spacious kitchen, my heart pounding as she closed the door behind us and turned to face me with arms crossed. I'm going to speak plainly, she said without preamble. There are rumors circulating about you and Damian. Rumors? I tried to inject just the right amount of surprise and indignation into my voice. What kind of rumors? The kind that could destroy my family, Celia replied sharply. Margaret Chen saw you at Damien's apartment building Thursday evening. She mentioned it to her daughter, who happens to work with Tamsin. My blood ran cold, but I forced myself to maintain eye contact. So what if I was there? Damien's family. We're friends. Friends, Celia repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. Married women don't typically visit their brother-in-law's apartments alone in the evening, Eulalia. Not unless they're up to something they shouldn't be. That's ridiculous, I said, anger flaring to cover my panic. You've never liked me, Celia. You've been looking for reasons to criticize me since the day I married Nathan. This isn't about my feelings toward you, she replied evenly. This is about protecting my sons and my granddaughter from a scandal that could tear this family apart. There is no scandal, I insisted, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. You're making something out of nothing, just like Nathan does. Maybe paranoia runs in your family." Celia's eyes flashed dangerously. "And maybe selfishness runs in yours. That boy in there," she gestured toward the dining room where Nathan sat with Mira, "has loved you completely since the day he met you. He works himself to the bone to provide for you and your daughter, and this is how you repay him." "You don't know anything about my marriage," I snapped. "You don't know what it's like living with someone who treats you like a piece of furniture, who never shows any emotion or appreciation." "I know my son," Celia interrupted, "and I know that if you're seeking attention elsewhere, it's because you're too selfish to appreciate what you already have." Before I could respond, the kitchen door opened and Roland appeared, his weathered face creased with concern. "Everything all right in here?" he asked, though it was obvious from our flushed faces and rigid postures that everything was decidedly not all right. "Just having a conversation," Celia said tightly, "about family loyalty." Roland's eyes moved between us, and I could see him trying to diffuse the situation. "Perhaps we should rejoin the others. Mira's asking for her grandmother." As we returned to the dining room, I felt exposed and vulnerable under the weight of their suspicions. Nathan looked up as we entered, his intelligent eyes taking in our tense expressions with obvious concern. "Is everything okay?" he asked quietly. "Fine," I said quickly, settling back into my chair and reaching for my wine glass with hands that trembled slightly. But nothing was fine. For the rest of the meal, I felt like I was under a microscope, every word and gesture analyzed for hidden meaning. When my phone buzzed with a text message, I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Expecting something important?" Nathan asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Just work," I lied, though I didn't dare check the message with everyone watching. After lunch, as we prepared to leave, Patrick arrived to pick up some tools he'd lent to Roland. He greeted me with polite coolness, and I noticed how he and Nathan stepped aside for a private conversation that involved several meaningful glances in my direction. "Nathan," Patrick said as we reached our cars, "maybe we could grab coffee this week, catch up on things." "I'd like that," Nathan replied, and something in his tone made my stomach clench with anxiety. The drive home was silent except for Mira's chatter from the back seat. Nathan stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. I wanted to say something, to break the suffocating tension, but I couldn't find words that wouldn't make things worse. Once we were home and Mira was settled with her homework, Nathan disappeared into his office with his laptop and a stack of files. I could hear him making phone calls, work calls, by the sound of it, but something about his tone suggested these weren't routine project discussions. As evening fell, I finally checked the text message that had arrived during lunch. It was from Damien. "Can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again?" I stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it, but not before my heart rate had spiked with a mixture of excitement and terror. The smart thing would be to end whatever was developing between us before it went any further. But the memory of how alive I'd felt in his arms, how valued and desired, made the prospect of returning to my empty marriage feel unbearable. Later that night, as Nathan worked late in his office again, I found myself typing a response to Damian. "Tuesday evening, same time." His reply was immediate. "Can't wait." As I deleted our exchange and prepared for bed, I told myself I wasn't really doing anything wrong. I was just talking to someone who understood me, someone who made me feel like the woman I used to be before marriage and motherhood had worn me down to a shadow of myself. But as I lay in bed listening to Nathan's quiet breathing beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at the edge of a cliff, and one more step would send me tumbling into an abyss I might never escape. Tuesday evening arrived with an unseasonable chill that made me pull my coat tighter as I hurried from my car to Damien's apartment building. I'd told Nathan I was meeting Tamsin for dinner, a lie that came easier than it should have, and he'd simply nodded without looking up from his laptop. The elevator ride to Damien's floor felt endless, my reflection in the polished steel doors showing a woman I barely recognized. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes bright with anticipation and guilt in equal measure. I'd spent an hour getting ready, choosing a dress that was just suggestive enough to send a message without being obvious. Damien opened his door before I could knock, as if he'd been watching for me through the peephole. He looked devastatingly handsome in dark jeans and a navy sweater that brought out his eyes, and the way his face lit up when he saw me made my heart race. "You came," he said, stepping aside to let me in. I almost didn't, I admitted, accepting the glass of wine he'd already poured for me. "This is complicated, Damien." "The best things usually are," he replied, his hand brushing mine as he handed me the glass. "I've been thinking about you constantly since Sunday. I can't focus on work, can't sleep. You're driving me crazy, Leah." His confession sent a thrill through me that I tried to suppress. "We can't keep doing this. Your family already suspects something." "Do you care about them more than you care about yourself?" he asked, moving closer until I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "When was the last time Nathan made you feel the way you feel right now?" The question hit home because I couldn't remember the last time Nathan had looked at me with desire, the last time he'd made me feel beautiful and wanted instead of simply tolerated. "That's not the point," I said weakly, even as I found myself leaning into his proximity. "Isn't it?" Damien's hand came up to cut my cheek, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw with infinite gentleness. "You deserve to be happy, Leah. You deserve to be cherished and adored, not taken for granted." When he kissed me this time, I didn't hesitate. I melted into his arms, letting myself drown in the sensation of being truly wanted for the first time in months. His hands tangled in my hair, and I pressed closer, desperate for the connection I'd been missing at home. "I've wanted this for so long," he murmured against my lips. "You have no idea how hard it's been, watching Nathan treat you like you don't matter, seeing you fade away a little more each day." "He doesn't mean to," I said, though the words felt hollow even to me. "Doesn't he?" Damien pulled back to look into my eyes. "A man who loves his wife doesn't ignore her, doesn't make her feel invisible. You're extraordinary, Leah, and if Nathan can't see that, he doesn't deserve you." His words were like balm to wounds I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. For months, I'd felt like I was disappearing, becoming nothing more than a wife and mother with no identity of her own. But in Damien's eyes, I was still the vibrant, desirable woman I'd once been. We moved to his sofa, and I found myself curled against his side, his arm around me as we talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his dreams of starting his own company, his frustration with corporate politics, his loneliness in a city full of people. I shared my own disappointments, the creative writing classes I'd given up after Mira was born, the travel dreams that had been shelved for practical concerns, the growing sense that my life was shrinking instead of expanding. "It doesn't have to be this way," he said, his fingers tracing patterns on my arm. "You could still do all those things. You could still be anything you want to be." "I'm 34 years old with a 7-year-old daughter and a mortgage," I laughed bitterly. "My adventurous days are behind me." "Says who? Nathan?" Damien turned to face me fully. "Leah, you're brilliant and beautiful and full of life. Don't let anyone, not even my brother, convince you that you have to settle for less than you deserve." When my phone rang, shattering the intimate bubble we'd created, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Nathan's name flashed on the screen, and guilt crashed over me like a cold wave. "I should answer," I said reluctantly. "Let it go to voicemail," Damien suggested, his hand covering mine to stop me from reaching for the phone. But it rang again immediately, and then a third time. With growing unease, I finally answered. "Leah?" Nathan's voice was tight with worry. "Where are you? Mira's asking for you. She had a nightmare, and she's pretty upset." My heart clenched with guilt and maternal instinct. "I'm still with Tamsin. Is she okay?" "She's asking when you'll be home. I told her soon, but—" Nathan's voice trailed off, and I could hear Mira crying in the background. "I'll be right there," I said, already reaching for my purse. Actually, Nathan continued, Tamsin called here looking for you about 10 minutes ago. She said you never showed up for dinner. The blood drained from my face as I realized my lie had been exposed. Across from me, Damian was watching with concern, but I couldn't focus on anything except Nathan's quiet, controlled voice and the sound of my daughter's distress. I can explain, I started, but Nathan cut me off. Just come home, Leah. We need to talk. The line went dead, and I stared at my phone in horror. Damien reached for me, but I was already standing, my mind racing with panic and the need to get to Mira. I have to go, I said, grabbing my coat with shaking hands. Leah, wait. Damien caught my arm gently. Whatever happens, remember what we talked about tonight. You don't have to accept a life that makes you miserable. I looked into his eyes one last time, seeing understanding and something that might have been love. Then I fled his apartment, my heart pounding as I raced through the empty streets toward home and whatever consequences awaited me there. The house was quiet when I arrived, but Nathan was waiting in the living room, his laptop closed on the coffee table and his hands folded in his lap. He looked up when I entered, and the sadness in his eyes was almost more than I could bear. Is Mira okay? I asked immediately. She's sleeping now, he replied quietly. She had a bad dream about us getting divorced. I told her that wasn't going to happen, but... He paused, studying my face. I'm not sure I should have made that promise. Nathan, I can explain about tonight. Can you? He stood slowly, his movements careful and controlled. Because I've been trying to understand what's happening to us, Leah. I've been trying to figure out where I went wrong, what I did to make you so unhappy that you'd rather lie to me than spend an evening at home. The pain in his voice cut through me like a knife, and for a moment I saw our situation through his eyes. A husband watching his wife slip away, not understanding why or how to stop it. You didn't do anything wrong, I said softly, and in that moment, I meant it. Then help me understand, he pleaded. Talk to me. Tell me what you need, what's missing, how we can fix this. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw the man I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. He was still handsome, still kind, still the steady, reliable presence I'd once found so comforting. But somewhere along the way, steady had become boring, reliable had become predictable, and I'd started to feel like I was suffocating in our quiet, orderly life. I don't know if we can fix it, I whispered, the words escaping before I could stop them. Nathan's face went very pale, but his voice remained steady. I see. Nathan, I didn't mean... Yes, you did, he said quietly. And maybe it's better that we're finally being honest with each other. He walked past me toward the stairs, and I felt a sudden, desperate urge to call him back, to take back the words that had created this chasm between us. But I stood frozen in the living room, listening to his footsteps on the stairs and the soft click of our bedroom door closing. As I sat alone in the dark house, I told myself that this was for the best. Nathan and I had been drifting apart for months, and maybe it was time to acknowledge that our marriage was over. Maybe it was time to stop pretending and start building the life I actually wanted, but as I climbed the stairs to the guest room where I would spend the night, I couldn't shake the image of Nathan's devastated face or the sound of Mira's frightened sobs. For the first time since this all began, I wondered if the price of my happiness might be higher than I was prepared to pay.